On a bright winter morning, Miles Corbett planned to repair one last watch and avoid the world outside. Then, an aging German shepherd stepped into the road and forced him to face the life he had abandoned. High above Leavenworth, 31 seniors were trapped without heat as the mountain routes began to fail. Miles knew the terrain, but the mountain had changed, and his old certainty was no longer enough. To reach them, he would have to trust a grieving widow, a careful rescue team, and a dog who refused to give up on him. What followed was not the story of one hero, but of ordinary people each holding one part of the line. Tell us where you're watching from or share your thoughts below, and please like and subscribe to help our channel reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating meaningful stories like this. Chapter 1. The man who fixed things that had stopped running on clear winter mornings. Leavenworth looked almost too carefully arranged to be real. Fresh snow softened the steep roofs along Front Street, covered porch railings in smooth white lines, and gathered in the dark branches of the surrounding firs. Sunlight poured into the valley from the east, turning every untouched surface bright enough to make people squint. Volunteers moved between wooden stalls in the town square, hanging evergreen garlands, testing strings of lights, and setting out folding tables for the weekend winter festival. Miles Corbett wanted no part of it. He stood alone behind the counter of his small clock repair shop, listening to the measured sounds around him. A wall clock counted the seconds with a dry wooden click. A brass carriage clock answered with a softer beat. On the workbench, a newly repaired pocket watch ticked inside a square of gray felt. Machines never pretended to be whole when they were not. A damaged spring weakened. A worn gear slipped. A bent pivot stopped moving. The fault could be found, measured, and corrected. People were less honest in the way they broke. Miles closed the back of the pocket watch and turned it beneath the lamp. His hands were large enough to make the instrument look delicate, yet his thick fingers moved with exact control. Years of ropes, steel anchors, frozen equipment, and mountain tools had left pale calluses across his palms. Clockwork had added smaller marks along his fingertips. At 63, he was still tall and broad through the shoulders, but age had changed the weight he carried. He no longer moved with the automatic certainty of the man who had once walked unstable slopes before sunrise. His left shoulder sat slightly lower when he was tired, and the first stiffness of morning took longer to leave his back. His face was long and angular, with high cheekbones, a narrow jaw, and a nose that bent faintly to the left from an old field accident. Brown-gray hair, longer than most men his age wore it, was combed back from a distinct silver streak at his right temple. A short salt and pepper beard followed the line of his jaw. The green-gray eyes reflected in the dark shop window still looked like the eyes of a man assessing distance. Miles slipped the pocket watch into a padded wooden box, then placed an old brass caliper in the chest pocket of his olive-gray canvas shirt. He had no practical reason to carry the caliper on a delivery. He carried it anyway. The watch belonged to a retired schoolteacher named Harold Jensen, who had asked Miles to return it before the festival crowds filled the street. Harold's father had carried it for 40 years. The mainspring had failed, and one of the gears had worn nearly smooth. Miles had replaced both. That did not mean the watch was new. A deep scratch still crossed the lid, and the initials on the back had softened with time. Miles had learned not to polish away every sign of use. Some marks belonged to an object's history rather than its damage. He put on his brown canvas coat, locked the shop, and walked toward his truck. Across the square, someone called his name. Miles pretended not to hear. People in town had mostly stopped inviting him to things, which was what he had wanted. 4 years earlier, Invitations had arrived regularly. Coffee after work, volunteer meetings, memorial dinners, requests for advice whenever snow began gathering on the mountain roads. Then came the unanswered messages, the closed curtains, and the silences long enough to teach even kind people when to leave a man alone. Before opening the clock shop, Miles had spent more than 2 decades evaluating snowpack and avalanche risk for the state. He had helped design maintenance routes, inspected control points, and stood beside road crews before dawn, deciding whether a highway could safely open. He had once believed careful preparation could hold disaster at a distance. Then Warren Pike failed to come home from a sensor inspection on a warming slope. The official investigation had continued after Miles resigned. Reports had been written, corrected, supplemented, and filed. Miles knew that because envelopes from the state had arrived at his house for nearly a year. He had opened the first 2. The rest remained in a box in the back of a closet. Miles started his truck and drove slowly toward the square. Festival volunteers moved carts of decorations across the street, forcing traffic to crawl. He kept one hand high on the wheel and the other near the wooden box on the passenger seat. The pocket watch ticked faintly beneath its lid. He was passing a row of temporary stalls when a German shepherd broke away from the volunteer area. The dog did not race into the street with the loose, careless energy of an animal chasing something. He moved with purpose, his yellow and black body cutting across the packed snow before stopping directly in front of the truck. Miles hit the brake. The wooden box slid from the passenger seat and struck the floor. For one suspended instant, the dog stood in the center of the windshield. He was large but lean, with a deep chest, an aging silver shadow around his muzzle, and an uneven black saddle that narrowed down his left side like a bolt of dark lightning. One ear stood straight. The other had a small, triangular notch missing from its tip. Miles knew him before his mind allowed the name. Orion. The dog stared through the glass. Then came the sound above them. Not loud at first. A short crack of strained wood followed by the rough sliding weight of wet snow. Miles looked toward the roofline of the nearest shop. A thick shelf of snow broke free from the metal awning and dropped onto the festival setup below. Folding tables tipped. Lightweight wooden panels fell into one another. Volunteers shouted and scattered away. Miles was out of the truck before the snow stopped moving. "Stay clear of the roof," he called. "Nobody goes under the awning." His voice carried across the square with a firmness he had not used in years. Several people stopped instinctively. Orion had already turned toward the fallen panels. He did not rush into them. He moved along the edge, ears shifting, nose working beneath the smell of snow, sawdust, coffee, and wool coats. Then he stopped beside a tilted display wall and gave one sharp bark. A woman answered from behind it. "I'm all right. I think my boot is caught." Miles crouched several feet away and studied the way the panels had fallen. Nothing heavy had collapsed, but one support beam was still under tension. "You in the red scarf," he said to a young volunteer nearby. "Keep everyone back from that corner. You two, take the weight from the left side. Slowly. Don't lift until I tell you." He removed his gloves and pressed one hand against the nearest panel. His mind separated the scene into angles, weight, pressure, and movement. It felt natural. That frightened him more than the collapse itself. "Now." The volunteers raised the panel just enough for Miles to reach the trapped woman. She was in her late 70s, bundled in a lavender coat, more embarrassed than afraid. Her boot had become wedged beneath the crossbar of a folding table. Miles freed it and helped her stand. "You hurt anywhere?" My dignity. That usually heals. The woman laughed, and the sound loosened something in the people around them. Someone brought a chair. Another volunteer wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Miles checked the remaining panels, ordered the area closed, and made sure no one else had been caught. By the time the local fire crew arrived from 2 streets away, the danger had already been contained. Only then did he notice that the pocket watch was still ticking. The faint rhythm came from inside his truck, nearly lost beneath the voices and the scrape of boots on snow. For 4 years, Miles had told himself the part of him that knew what to do in an emergency had stopped working. Standing in the bright winter square, he understood that it had not stopped. It had only been waiting without his permission. Orion. The voice came from behind him. Diane Pike crossed the snow with a red medical bag in one hand and Orion's leash in the other. At 60, she carried herself with the direct, balanced posture of someone who had spent years moving quickly through crowded emergency rooms. Her navy winter coat was open over a rust-colored turtleneck, and silver had begun to thread through the chin-length auburn hair tucked behind her ears. She knelt beside the older woman, checked her ankle, asked 2 efficient questions, and accepted the woman's answer without turning the moment into a performance. Then Diane stood and looked at Miles. The cold between them had nothing to do with the weather. "You still give orders like everyone's been waiting for them," she said. Miles looked toward Orion. "He ran into the road. He stopped you before that roof came down. He heard the wood. I know what he heard." Her response carried no suggestion of magic. Diane had known Orion's abilities longer than anyone still living. Orion approached Miles slowly. His first few steps showed stiffness in the right shoulder, but the unevenness faded as he moved. He stopped close enough for Miles to see snow caught in the pale fur around his muzzle. For weeks after Warren's memorial, Orion had appeared outside Miles's house with Diane. Sometimes Diane had knocked. Sometimes she had only stood beside the dog at the end of the walkway. Miles had watched from behind the curtains. Orion had always looked directly at the window. "I should have called," Miles said. Diane's expression did not change. "Which time?" He had no answer large enough for the question. An alarm sounded from several phones around the square. The tone was harsh, mechanical, and immediately recognizable as a county emergency alert. Conversations stopped. People reached into pockets and read the message appearing across their screens. Diane looked at hers first. Sunrise Ridge lost grid power. Miles read the rest on his own phone. The senior residential community sat on the northern slope above the valley. Its central heating system had stopped, and the main access road was blocked by a snowslide. Residents were being moved into a single heated common room, while emergency crews evaluated access. A second message followed. The remaining snow above the road was unstable. Plows and ambulances could not enter. High winds along the ridge made a helicopter landing unsafe. Bright sun still covered the square. The mountain above had become unreachable. A county vehicle pulled in beside the temporary fire barrier. Lena Ortiz stepped out wearing a dark emergency management jacket over navy tactical trousers. She was compact and quick-moving, with olive-toned skin, a narrow face, and black hair braided low behind her neck. A waterproof map case was already tucked beneath one arm. She spoke briefly with the fire captain, checked the cordoned roof, and then walked directly toward Miles. "Mr. Corbett, I don't work for the state anymore." "I know." Lena opened the map case on the hood of his truck. "The primary road is closed. There's an old service route to the auxiliary pump station here, but the county file is incomplete after the mudslide 2 years ago." Miles looked at the contour lines despite himself. The map showed only part of the route. He could see where the missing section should have crossed the slope, where old anchor points had been drilled into the rock, and where a maintenance bypass had once curved above a drainage channel. "You helped design this section," Lena said. "I helped design the original route. The terrain has changed. That is why I'm asking for a terrain advisor, not a guide who thinks he knows everything." Her directness almost made Diane smile. Miles folded his arms. "You have current maps? Drones? Road crews?" "We have those. We also have 31 residents without central heat and a limited window before the temperature drops. Then evacuate them. The road is not safe enough yet. The generator can support medical equipment and one common room, but not full electric heating. If the auxiliary pump station can be reached and restarted, they may not need to be moved at all." Miles looked again at the map. The lines seemed to rise from the paper. He could feel the shape of the slope beneath his boots, though he stood on level pavement. He remembered anchor bolts, frozen cables, the metallic vibration of testing equipment, and a radio transmission that had ended beneath static. "No," he said. Lena did not argue. "Understood." She closed the map case. Diane clipped Orion's leash to the burgundy collar around his neck. "A few of the residents depend on powered medical equipment. Nora has everyone together for now, but that room won't stay warm forever." Miles stared at her. "You think telling me that changes what's safe?" "No." Diane's voice remained even. "I think it changes what your decision means." She turned toward Lena's vehicle. "Orion, come." The German shepherd did not move. Diane stopped but did not repeat the command. Orion sat beside Miles's left leg, looking toward the mountain rather than at either of them. His body was still, his breathing slow. He was not pulling Miles toward danger. He was not choosing Warren over Diane or giving some impossible message from the past. He was simply refusing to leave a frightened man alone. Miles slipped one hand into his coat pocket. His thumb found the worn edge of the brass caliper. Beyond the bright roofs of Leavenworth, the northern slope rose white beneath the sun. From the square, it looked clean, peaceful, and close enough to touch. Miles knew better than anyone how much danger could hide beneath beautiful snow. He also knew he could walk back to his shop, lock the door, and spend the rest of the day repairing objects that never asked why he had abandoned them. But this time, 31 people had names, rooms, medications, habits, and lives continuing on the other side of that mountain. If he turned away now, he would not be escaping an old memory. He would know exactly whom he had left behind. Chapter 2. A mission that needed no hero. Miles agreed before he could make the decision sound temporary. "I'll advise on the terrain," he told Lena Ortiz. "You remain in command." Lena studied him for a moment, as if checking whether the words were an offer or a condition designed to preserve his pride. "I remain in command whether you advise us or not," she said. "But yes." The square had changed quickly. Festival tables were pushed aside. County vehicles occupied the curb. Volunteers who had been stringing lights 10 minutes earlier now carried crates of bottled water, medical blankets, batteries, and portable radios toward the emergency station inside the municipal hall. No one celebrated Miles's decision. He was grateful for that. Lena unfolded the operational map across a folding table and placed a gloved finger on the road climbing north from town. A red line marked the slide that had blocked the main approach to Sunrise Ridge. A larger shaded area above it represented the remaining snow that had not yet released. "The road crew is holding below the runout zone," she said. "No plows move until the slope team clears them." Wind on the ridge is still above landing limits, so air support stays on standby. How long before conditions improve? Miles asked. They may not. It was the correct answer. He disliked it anyway. Lena indicated a thinner line branching from an old forestry road. The tracked carrier takes you this far. From there, you continue on foot to the auxiliary pump station. You do not leave the checked route without authorization. You do not enter a structure until Jamal evaluates it. If communications fail, you return to the last confirmed point. Miles glanced toward the man checking equipment beside the county truck. Jamal Reeves had the heavy shoulders and patient movements of someone accustomed to machinery that could not be hurried. His head was shaved close, and a short salt and pepper beard framed a calm, broad face. An orange-brown shell lay open over a dark thermal shirt, while he inspected carabiners one at a time. A green mechanical pencil was tucked behind his right ear. Jamal looked up. And nobody tells me a piece of gear is fine because it was fine 15 years ago. Miles felt the sentence aimed directly at him. That happens often? He asked. More often than gear improves with age. Diane hid the beginning of a smile by tightening the strap on Orion's harness. The German Shepherd wore a charcoal-insulated vest beneath a burgundy rescue harness. Reflective strips ran along both sides, and a padded handle rested above his shoulders, so Diane could support him on difficult ground. Orion stood patiently while she checked the fit around his chest, though his ears followed every sound in the busy square. Miles noticed the way Diane tested the space beneath each strap with 2 fingers. She had always treated preparations as an act of care rather than worry. Orion stays with me, she said without looking up. If his shoulder stiffens or his breathing changes, we turn him back. Miles nodded. Diane finally met his eyes. That was information, not a request for approval. I understood. Good. Inside the municipal hall, Ruth Delaney had converted a registration desk into a communication station. She was short and solidly built, with silver hair cut in a practical pixie that refused to lie flat beneath her headset. Round blue-framed glasses sat low on her nose. One hand adjusted the county radio, while the other held a scratched red thermos. I have Sunrise Ridge on Channel 3, road operations on 5, medical on 7, and Lena on every channel because apparently authority enjoys surround sound. Lena walked past without reacting. Ruth winked at Miles. Still no sense of humor before lunch. I heard that, Lena said. You were meant to. The exchange was brief, but it altered the air. These people knew one another's habits. Their confidence did not come from pretending the situation was simple. It came from knowing who would answer when called. Ruth pressed a button on the console. Sunrise Ridge County Command. We have terrain team assembled. Give us your current status. Static washed through the speaker before a woman answered. This is Nora Kemp. All residents are accounted for. Her voice was steady but carried the strained brightness of someone speaking calmly for the sake of everyone listening nearby. Nora was the manager of Sunrise Ridge, and she gave her report without unnecessary detail. 31 residents had been moved into the common room. Unused corridors were closed. Heavy curtains had been hung across the widest windows. Blankets were distributed, medications checked, and portable lamps positioned away from fabrics. One resident uses an oxygen concentrator, Nora continued. It is on generator power, and we have backup cylinders if needed. The common room is at 57 degrees and falling slowly. Any immediate medical emergencies? Lena asked. None. A few people are frightened. Most are complaining that the coffee is weak. A faint voice spoke behind Nora, loud enough to reach the radio. It is weak. Ruth smiled. Good sign, they still have standards. Nora continued. We can manage several hours. I would not promise the night. Lena acknowledged the report, then turned to the diagram spread beside the topographic map. The heating system was less mysterious than the mountain around it. Sunrise Ridge had once been a private lodge before being converted into senior housing. Its pellet boiler still worked, and the fuel storage remained nearly full. The problem was circulation. The auxiliary pump station on the slope had lost its anti-freeze heating when grid power failed. Without the pump, hot water from the boiler could not move through the closed loop serving the residential wings. A second voice came over the radio, quieter and more precise. This is Edna Cho. I supervised the last pump replacement with the maintenance committee. Edna sounded like a woman accustomed to being listened to eventually, even when others made the mistake of not listening at first. The bypass valve may be frozen, she said, or the intake filter may be blocked after the pump stopped. If the line itself has split, you will see pressure loss at the manifold. Nora can read that from here. Miles leaned closer to the diagram. Who designed the service access? He asked. An engineering firm in Spokane, Edna replied. The company closed 8 years ago. I kept the operating manuals because throwing away useful information offends me. Jamal glanced at Miles. I like her already. If you reach the pump station, Edna continued, do not force the bypass valve. The seal housing is old. Warm it gradually, clean the filter, then have Nora bring the circulation system online from this side. And if we cannot reach it? Lena asked. Then you begin evacuation before sunset. Silence followed. The mission had acquired a clean dividing line. Restore circulation, or move 31 older residents through winter terrain one by one. No one needed to say which option placed more people at risk. Outside, Jamal conducted the final gear check. Miles had changed into charcoal technical pants and an olive-drab combat shirt beneath a gray winter shell. The fitted torso allowed movement beneath a harness, while the camouflage-patterned sleeves had reinforced bands around the upper arms. There were no military patches or unit markings. The shirt was simply durable equipment from a former field job. Miles placed his old climbing harness on the truck bed. Jamal picked it up, turned it over, and examined the webbing. No. The stitching is intact. The webbing is sun-faded. It has been stored indoors. The manufacturer's date says it should have retired before you did. Miles reached for it. Jamal moved it aside. I know that harness, Miles said. I've trusted it with my weight. That is not a technical inspection. It has never failed. Neither had the culvert on the service road until this morning. The answer landed harder than Jamal intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as he intended. For years, Miles had been the person who rejected unsafe equipment. He had cut old ropes from service while men complained about budgets. He had closed routes that looked perfectly stable to people standing below them. Now another man was applying the same standard to him. Jamal handed him a newer harness. You can be irritated while wearing this one. Miles looked at Diane. She did not rescue him from the embarrassment. He put on the new harness. Jamal checked every buckle, then said the next 3 steps aloud. Carrier to the controlled boundary. Snowshoes from there. No route changes without a ground check and Lena's approval. Miles nodded once. The tracked carrier climbed out of Leavenworth beneath a sky so blue it seemed to deny the emergency. Houses thinned into forest. Snowbanks rose along the road, smooth where the plows had cut them and rough where wind had rebuilt their edges. Jamal drove. Miles sat beside him with the map secured against his knee. Diane and Orion rode in the rear compartment, where equipment had been strapped against the walls. Ruth's voice followed them through the radio. Carrier Team Command. Sunrise Ridge temperature now 56. Road crew remains staged. Drone 1 approaching the lower service route. Miles studied the slope through the windshield. He recognized the broad shape of it, but not the details. Young firs had grown where bare cuts once opened the view. A drainage gully had widened. Snow-covered changes that the summer landscape might have revealed. He pointed toward a low ridge. The old route bends left beyond those trees. Drone will confirm, Jamal said. I designed the bypass. And the mountain has had a decade to make revisions. Miles looked at him. Jamal kept his eyes on the road. Nothing personal. That usually means it is. It means Snow does not care which one of us is offended. The carrier stopped at the final point, cleared by the slope team. Beyond it, the service road narrowed between trees and disappeared beneath untouched snow. They unloaded quietly. Diane helped Orion down, using the padded handle above his harness. His right shoulder was stiff for the first few steps. She walked him in a small circle until his stride became even. You'd leave him at the carrier, Miles said. I could. But you won't. Diane checked Orion's pause. Warren trained him on this ground. Not this exact route, but this kind of work. Orion knows how to conserve energy better than some people I've met. Miles understood the last words were not entirely about the dog. The drone reached the lower route before they did. Ruth's voice changed in their headsets. The humor disappeared. Hold position. We have a structural concern 20 yards ahead. Jamal raised a closed fist, and the group stopped. A tablet image arrived through the field unit. At first, Miles saw only a white road bordered by dark trees. Then the drone camera shifted, revealing a narrow depression crossing the snow. The old culvert beneath the route had collapsed. Meltwater had eaten away the soil around it, leaving a hollow space hidden beneath a thin roof of snow. From ground level, the road appeared smooth and solid. A person might have crossed it. The tracked carrier would almost certainly have broken through. Jamal enlarged the image. And we turn uphill here. Miles shook his head. That adds at least 40 minutes. The lower side used to carry fully loaded maintenance trucks. Used to. The base was reinforced. Before the flood 2 years ago. We can probe the edges and cross one at a time. Jamal faced him fully now. No. Miles felt the old authority rise in him, automatic and impatient. We are losing temperature at Sunrise Ridge. And crossing an unsupported void does not save time if we have to recover someone from it. Miles opened his mouth. Lena's voice came over the radio. Terrain team, command confirms the lower route is closed. Proceed on Jamal's alternate path. There was no space left for argument. Miles looked at the white surface ahead. He had been certain of it. Not recklessly certain. Not carelessly certain. He had simply been using a truth that had expired without telling him. The distinction offered no comfort. They climbed instead. The alternate route cut across a longer slope beneath dense firs. Snowshoes spread their weight, but every step still required effort. Orion moved beside Diane rather than in front. When he paused with his ears angled toward a faint sound under the snow, Diane stopped with him. Jamal checked the area using a probe. Buried runoff, he said. Solid enough on this side. We stay high. Orion resumed walking only after the others moved. No one treated him as a guide. He was part of the team, adding information that still required human judgment. An hour into the climb, Lena ordered a 5-minute rest near a stand of thick trees. Diane gave Orion water from a collapsible bowl and massaged the muscles above his right shoulder. Miles stood several feet away, looking down through the branches toward the route they had abandoned. "You were right to bring him," he said. Diane did not look up. He was never the problem. Miles let the words remain where she placed them. After a moment, he asked, "Was he with Warren that day?" Diane's hands stopped against Orion's fur. "No." Miles had imagined Orion on the mountain for 4 years. In some versions, the dog had sensed the slope changing. In others, Warren had sent him away. Miles had never asked because asking required entering Diane's grief rather than observing it from a distance. "He was recovering from this shoulder injury," she continued. "Warren left him at the lower station. It was supposed to be a sensor inspection, not a search assignment." Orion lifted his head at Warren's name. Diane rested one hand along the black saddle of his back. "He waited beside the equipment gate until dark. The next morning, he went back to the same place. He did that for 9 days." Miles watched the dog's amber eyes follow movement between the trees. Orion had not witnessed what happened on the mountain. He had not understood reports, unstable layers, delayed teams, or revised forecasts. He only knew that Warren had walked away and failed to return. "And then?" Miles asked. "Then he started waiting outside your house." The cold seemed to settle differently around them. Miles remembered the shape of Orion beyond the curtain, sitting at the end of the walkway while snow gathered along his back. He had told himself the dog was confused. He had told himself Diane would eventually stop bringing him. He had never considered that Orion might have lost one person and then watched another choose to disappear. Jamal rose and adjusted his pack. "Rest is over." Diane closed the water bottle and checked Orion's harness again. Miles did not apologize. Any apology he could offer in that moment would have been too small and too easy. The group returned to the climb. Orion moved beside Diane, steady and quiet. Miles followed several steps behind, carrying a map that no longer told the whole truth. For the first time since leaving town, he understood that the route ahead was not the only thing he had remembered incorrectly. Chapter 3. The report Miles never finished. The old observation station appeared through the trees without ceremony. It was a low, square building set against the slope, half concrete and half weather-darkened timber, with a shallow roof designed to shed more wind than snow. A metal mast rose beside it, stripped of most of its instruments. The remaining cups of an old wind gauge turned slowly in the clear air, producing a faint, uneven click. Jamal reached the door first and examined the frame before opening it. "No visible shifting," he said. "Roofline looks sound. We enter one at a time." Inside, the station smelled of cold metal, lamp oil, and wood that had absorbed decades of damp winters. There was no forgotten journal waiting beneath a loose floorboard, no sealed box, no message left behind by the dead. A dented oil stove occupied one corner. A first aid cabinet hung beside the door. 3 manual snow-measuring rods leaned against the wall, their painted numbers faded almost white. A narrow table stood beneath a window facing south. The place was useful, ordinary, and empty. Miles preferred it that way. Jamal lit the stove and checked the vent. Diane spread a reflective ground sheet near the wall, then guided Orion onto it. The German shepherd circled once before lowering himself carefully, favoring his right shoulder for only a moment. Diane loosened the front strap of his harness and offered water. Miles remained near the window. The valley below was bright enough to look harmless. Sunlight lay across the southern face of the mountain, turning the upper crust of snow from dry white to a faint glassy shine. Small clumps released from tree branches and landed with soft, heavy sounds. The temperature had risen faster than forecast. Miles placed 2 fingers against the window frame. The metal was expanding in the sun, producing tiny ticks as it warmed. A tap, a pause, another tap. For an instant, the room around him narrowed. He remembered a radio hissing in a cold truck, Warren's voice asking for updated surface readings. A technician repeating numbers that did not match what Miles could see from the lower station. Sunlight striking the slope earlier than expected because a bank of cloud had broken apart. Nothing in the memory arrived as a complete scene. It came in fragments too small to argue with. Metal contracting, static, snow brushing a roof, a man saying, "We're turning back." Miles? Diane's voice returned him to the observation station. He lowered his hand from the window. "Surface is warming," he said. Jamal crossed to the manual thermometer mounted outside the window and read it through the glass. Up 4 degrees since the lower checkpoint. "The south face will soften first," Miles said. "We should stay inside the trees when we move." Jamal marked the reading on his field sheet. Agreed. He did not ask why Miles had gone still. Diane did not ask either. That restraint felt less comfortable than concern would have. Ruth's voice came through their radios. "Observation team, command. Confirm status," Jamal answered. "Inside Station 4, structure stable, beginning 10-minute rest and route review." "Copy. Sunrise Ridge is holding. Nora reports common room temperature at 55 degrees. Diane looked at the radio. "That dropped faster." "Yes," Ruth said. The lightness had left her voice. "Wind is pushing against the north windows. They have sealed the lower gaps with towels." Miles took the folded route map from his jacket and opened it on the table. The old service line continued east from the station, then descended toward the auxiliary pump building. On paper, the path looked manageable. Outside the south-facing window, another sheet of snow slid from the roof and struck the ground. The sound was not loud. Miles still flinched. Ruth spoke again. "Miles, I need to ask you something." He looked down at the map. "Go ahead." "I pulled the archived weather file from the Pike incident." Diane's hand stopped on Orion's shoulder. Jamal looked from her to Miles, then quietly stepped toward the far end of the room. He gave them distance without pretending he could not hear. Miles folded one edge of the map along an existing crease. "Why?" "The current warming curve resembles that day. Not identical, but close enough that Lena asked for the old sequence. You only need the sensor data. I have the sensor data." The radio carried a few seconds of static. "I also found the supplemental review." Miles's thumb pressed hard against the paper. The state had mailed him that review 11 months after Warren's death. He remembered the thick envelope, the official seal, and the sentence on the first page, stating that additional modeling had changed several preliminary conclusions. He had read 6 pages. Then he had placed the report back in the envelope and stored it in a closet beneath winter coats he no longer wore. "I know the review exists," he said. Ruth's answer was gentle but direct. "Did you finish it?" No one moved inside the station. Orion lifted his head, responding not to the words but to the change in the room. Miles looked through this window again. "No." Diane sat back on her heels. Ruth did not fill the silence with sympathy. The original report said Warren's team continued beyond the recommended turnaround point, she said. The supplemental review corrected that. Miles closed his eyes. Ruth, you need the same information we need. He wanted to tell her this was not the time. He wanted to say the mountain required facts, not history. But history had already entered the room through the sound of warming metal. Ruth continued. The sensor network underestimated the rate of surface warming. One shaded unit was used to calibrate the exposed instruments, and the model did not account for the cloud cover breaking as early as it did. Miles knew the instruments. He had approved their placement after weeks of field testing. The system had been considered conservative, designed to warn too early rather than too late. Warren reported that the readings no longer matched field conditions. Ruth said. He ordered the inspection group to return. Diane's breathing changed. He turned them around? She asked. Yes. Miles stared at the old snow rods leaning against the wall. One of them had a crack near its base. Someone had wrapped it with silver tape rather than throw it away. What time? He asked. 10:42. The release occurred before they regained the protected line. The words entered him slowly. For 4 years, Miles had carried a simpler version of events, because simple blame was easier to hold than uncertainty. He had approved the sensors. Warren had gone on to the slope. The forecast had been wrong. Warren had not returned. Those facts formed a closed mechanism. Miles had made himself the broken part. Now Ruth was telling him the mechanism had been more complicated. The equipment had failed to represent conditions accurately. Warren had recognized the problem. The team had responded correctly. The mountain had changed faster than the system understood. The new truth did not release Miles. It only removed the shape of the punishment he had built his life around. I signed off on the network, he said. And the review says the flaw was not identifiable under the testing standards in use then. Ruth replied. Standards do not bring anyone home. No, Diane said. They do not. Her voice was quiet enough to make him turn. She was no longer looking at Orion. She was looking directly at Miles. I never thought you sent Warren up there knowing it was unsafe. Miles felt something defensive rise in him. You should have. Do not tell me what I should have believed. The sentence was not loud, but it carried 20 years of friendship and 4 years of absence. Diane stood. The station was small enough that she did not need to move closer. What did you think would happen if you came to my house? She asked. That I would look at you and see only the man who approved a sensor? Miles said nothing. You stopped answering calls. You did not come when we held the first spring memorial. You sent Warren's tools back through someone from the county because you could not bring them yourself. I thought seeing me would make it worse. For whom? He had answered that question in his mind 100 times. For Diane, for Orion, for everyone who had worked with Warren. Standing in front of her, he heard what the answer had always concealed. For me, he said. Diane's expression tightened, not with victory, but with exhaustion. Before Warren's death, the three of them had shared more than work. Diane had sat beside Miles's wife, Elaine, through the final months of her illness, bringing soup that went cold and speaking normally when everyone else lowered their voices. Warren had rebuilt the damaged floor of Miles's future clock shop after a winter pipe burst. He had spent 3 weekends installing shelves, complaining constantly and refusing payment. When Elaine died, Diane and Warren had not allowed Miles to disappear. When Warren died, Miles had not returned the favor. I believed staying away would keep my guilt from entering your house, Miles said. Diane glanced toward the stove, where a thin blue flame moved behind the small glass panel. You do not get to decide which memories are allowed inside my house. The statement settled between them. You did not protect me from remembering Warren, she continued. You made me lose another friend while I was already learning how to live without my husband. Orion stood and crossed the short distance to Diane. He leaned lightly against her leg. This time, he did not look at Miles. The absence of that attention hurt more than accusation would have. The radio sounded. Nora Kemp's voice came through, less composed than before. County Command, Sunrise Ridge. We need medical guidance. Lena answered immediately. Go ahead. One resident is experiencing shortness of breath. Oxygen saturation is lower than his normal range. Concentrator is running. Backup cylinder is ready. A medical coordinator joined the channel and began asking Nora-controlled questions. The resident was conscious and able to speak. There was no immediate crisis, but the cold was increasing his discomfort and anxiety. Diane reached automatically for her medical bag, though the man was miles away. Keep him upright, she told Nora when Lena opened the channel to her. Warm the air around him, not just the blankets. Slow breaths. Do not increase oxygen beyond his prescribed setting unless medical directs it. Nora repeated the instructions. The human emergency replaced the past without erasing it. Jamal moved to the table and checked the updated drone feed. His expression changed. We have another problem. The tablet showed the service route beyond Station 4. A retaining wall had once supported the path where it curved above a narrow drainage. Autumn runoff had undermined the base. Part of the wall had collapsed, taking a section of the route into the ravine. The remaining shelf was too narrow and unstable to cross safely. Miles studied the image from several angles. There used to be a reinforced ledge above it. Drone cannot see a continuous path, Jamal said. It may be under the trees. Maybe is not a route. Miles looked at the time. Returning to town would take longer than their climb, because the alternate path was steeper going down. By the time Lena assembled enough snow vehicles for an evacuation and the slope team cleared an approach, daylight would be nearly gone. Still, turning back felt like the only decision that did not depend on another uncertain line on an old map. We return, Miles said. Prepare the evacuation from below. Jamal calculated silently, tracing distances with the green pencil from behind his ear. We will not reach the carrier. Descend to command, reload, and get evacuation teams to Sunrise Ridge before the temperature becomes a larger medical issue. Then what do you suggest? Edna Cho answered through the radio before Jamal could. There is another inspection path. Miles leaned toward the speaker. Edna described a narrow maintenance line rising from the east side of the observation station, circling above the damaged retaining wall and approaching the pump building from higher ground. That path is not on this map, Miles said. No, Edna replied. It was added when the pump station was upgraded. Contractors used it to carry pipe sections without closing the lower service road. When was the last inspection? 7 years ago. That is not recent. Neither is the route you intended to use. Jamal lowered his head, perhaps to hide a reaction. Edna continued in the same measured tone. There are steel anchor points along the exposed section. Nora has the maintenance photographs in the facility archive. Ruth can transmit them. Miles looked at the map that had already failed him once that morning. The alternate path did not exist in his memory. Edna had seen it, worked around it, and kept records of it. From Sunrise Ridge, she could provide information he did not possess. Trusting her would not mean the path was safe. It would mean admitting that safety no longer belonged entirely to what Miles knew. Lena came onto the channel. Jamal, assess the inspection path from the images. No movement until you are satisfied with the anchor condition and approach. Copy. Miles, Lena said. Your recommendation? He looked at Diane. Her anger remained, but she was not asking him to prove anything. Jamal waited with the tablet. Ruth began transmitting Edna's archived photographs. Beyond the walls, the sun continued warming a mountain that had never cared who held authority. Miles folded his old map and placed it back in his jacket. We evaluate Edna's route, he said. And if Jamal clears it, we follow her instructions. From the radio came Edna's calm reply. Good. Then begin by forgetting where you expected the path to be. Chapter 4. The man in front stepped back. The inspection path began behind Station 4, where a narrow break in the trees climbed away from the route Miles had expected to use. Without Edna's archived photographs, it would have looked like nothing more than a gap left by fallen branches. Snow had swallowed the old steps, and young firs leaned over the entrance as if the mountain had been quietly reclaiming it. Jamal compared the first steel anchor with the photograph Ruth had transmitted to his tablet. The image showed clean rock, fresh cable, and a yellow paint mark beside the bolt. 7 winters later, the paint had faded to a dull stain, but the anchor remained where Edna said it would be. Visual inspection first, Jamal said. Then load test. He cleared ice from the metal, checked the rock around it for cracks, and attached a short test line. Miles watched every movement. The upper bolt carried more load during installation, he said. Use that one. Jamal did not look up. I'm checking both. The lower section was drilled into softer rock. I heard you. Jamal tested the first anchor, then the second. Only after both held did he clip in the team line. The route climbed through dense firs for several hundred yards before emerging onto a narrow traverse above the damaged retaining wall. The exposed portion was no wider than a maintenance walkway. Steel anchors had been installed at regular intervals along the rock face, so workers could remain secured while carrying tools. Jamal explained the procedure before anyone moved. One person crosses each segment at a time. Clip the next anchor before releasing the last. Keep 10 feet between us and the trees and 1 full anchor section on the traverse. If anybody says stop, everybody stops. Miles looked toward the slope below. We should reduce the distance on the exposed section. Less time between crossings. More people on one section means more load and fewer options if someone slips. The anchors were designed for 2 workers. 7 years ago. Miles's jaw tightened. Jamal secured the green pencil behind his ear and faced him. I will use your knowledge. I will not confuse it with current inspection. There was no challenge in his tone, which made it harder to resist. Jamal was not trying to prove Miles wrong. He was simply refusing to let the past certify the present. They entered the trees. The first part of the climb was protected from direct sun, but the snow was deep and uneven. Jamal broke trail. Diane followed with Orion beside her, one hand resting near the padded handle on his harness. Miles came last, carrying the route photographs and watching the slope through the spaces between trunks. The arrangement bothered him almost immediately. From the rear, he could see every delay without controlling it. Jamal paused to probe a drift near a buried log. Diane stopped twice to check Orion's breathing. Ruth interrupted with an updated temperature reading from Sunrise Ridge. Each pause was reasonable. Together, they felt intolerable. We need to increase pace, Miles said. Diane glanced back. Orion's stride is even. I'm not only talking about Orion. Then be specific. We are moving below the estimate. Jamal continued checking the drift. The estimate did not include this snow depth. Miles stepped closer. If we angle right, the ground should be firmer. Should be? The old drainage line runs left. Jamal pushed the probe into the snow. It sank farther than expected. The drainage line moved, he said. We stay where I can confirm support. Miles looked toward the sunlit upper slope. The color of the snow had changed since they left the observation station. A faint sheen covered exposed areas, and water had begun dripping from the lower branches. He knew what warming did to time. It turned minutes into material. Diane, keep Orion closer to your left, he said. If Jamal has to stop again, the dog should not block the line. Diane did not answer. A few minutes later, Orion slowed at a steep step beneath a fallen trunk. Diane reached for the handle on his harness, but Miles moved forward. Lift from behind the shoulders, he said, not the center. I know how his harness works. You are pulling against the injured side. I am supporting his chest. Orion climbed the step with Diane's help and continued without difficulty. Miles remained beside them. His right shoulder is shortening his stride. It has done that since before we left town. Then he should have stayed at the carrier. Diane stopped. The quiet that followed was different from the pauses required by the terrain. Orion stood against her leg, breathing steadily. Frost had collected along the lower edge of his vest. His amber eyes moved from Diane to Miles. He is within the limits we agreed on, Diane said. We did not know that this path would be so narrow. We also did not know the lower road had collapsed. That is exactly why we reduce variables. Diane's face hardened. Orion is not a variable. He is an older working dog with an existing injury. He is my responsibility. We are all Jamal's responsibility on this route. Jamal turned from the next anchor. Correct, which means I decide whether Orion continues. Miles looked at him. And he continues. The team moved again, but the argument did not end. It simply changed shape. Miles corrected the angle of Jamal's carabiner before realizing it had already been positioned properly. He told Ruth to hold non-essential radio traffic, though she was not sending any. He asked Edna to repeat distances she had already confirmed from the maintenance record. The more the path refused to match his expectations, the more Miles tried to make the people around him predictable. By the time they reached the exposed traverse, even Orion had begun watching him carefully. Jamal inspected the first 3 anchors and cleared loose ice from the walkway. I cross first, he said. Diane and Orion next, Miles last. No, I know the anchor placement, and I am evaluating it. If the upper section has deteriorated, you will need someone who understands the original load plan. You can explain it from here. The answer struck at something deeper than professional pride. Miles had spent years being the person sent forward because others believed he could see what they could not. Standing back felt like failing before anything had happened. I should lead the traverse, he said. Jamal removed one glove and tucked it into his jacket. His expression remained calm, but he no longer moved toward the anchor. We are stopping. We do not have time to stop. We are already stopped. Lena's voice came through the radio. What is the issue? Jamal answered without drama. Competing direction. I cannot manage the route while instructions are being changed behind me. Miles pressed the transmit button. I am providing technical information. You are overriding the field lead, Lena said. I designed part of this system. And you are here as an advisor. Jamal controls movement. Diane controls medical decisions and Orion. Ruth controls communications. You do not absorb their roles because you are uncomfortable. The sentence was precise enough to leave nowhere for Miles to hide. He looked at the traverse, the anchors, the light shifting across the snow. Every instinct urged him to move, direct, correct, and prevent. Behind that urgency was a simpler fear. If he did not control every decision, something might happen that he could not undo. "Fine," he said. "Jamal leads." But his voice made it clear that nothing had changed. Jamal heard it. "We move when I believe the team is working as one team." Diane stood several yards away with Orion. She did not intervene. She did not explain Miles to the others or soften Lena's words. For years, Diane had been the person who understood the fear underneath his worst habits. Miles had mistaken that understanding for an obligation to excuse them. He looked toward Orion. The German shepherd's breathing was calm. His body remained close to Diane, but his attention rested on Miles. Without thinking, Miles used an old command. "Orion, close left." The words came in Warren's cadence. It was a field command Warren had used when he wanted Orion tight against his left leg before entering difficult terrain. Miles had heard it hundreds of times during training exercises and road searches. Orion's ears rose. For half a second, the years seemed to fold together. Warren should have been standing near the anchor, smiling beneath a frost-covered cap, pretending not to notice that Miles had copied his tone. "Close left," Miles repeated. Orion did not come. The dog looked at Miles, then turned back toward Diane. He stepped against her side and lowered his head beneath her hand. The refusal was not dramatic. Orion did not growl, pull away, or challenge him. He simply chose the person responsible for him now. Miles felt the truth of that choice with surprising force. He had been treating Orion as a surviving piece of Warren, as if using the right command might restore the old order, prove Miles still belonged inside it, or allow him to correct an ending that had already happened. But Orion was not a memory waiting to be activated. He was 9 years old. His shoulder ached in the cold. He lived with Diane. He trusted her hands, her pace, and her decisions. The loyalty he had once given Warren did not require him to remain suspended in Warren's absence forever. Miles looked at Diane. "I'm sorry." Her expression remained guarded. He continued before the apology could become larger than the moment deserved. "I'm interfering with the route, and I'm treating Orion like he belongs to a time that is gone." Diane's fingers rested against the notch in Orion's left ear. "Yes," she said. No reassurance, no immediate forgiveness, just agreement. Miles turned to Jamal. "You lead. I will identify the original anchors and the terrain features. I will not change movement instructions." Jamal studied him for a moment. "Can you do that?" Miles looked down at the brass caliper visible inside his chest pocket. A tool made for exact measurements had never been useful against uncertainty. "I can start." That answer was enough. Jamal crossed the first segment alone, testing each anchor before shifting his weight. From the far side, he clipped a guideline for Diane. She shortened Orion's leash, attached the secondary safety tether to his harness, and moved slowly across. Orion placed each paw carefully on the packed walkway. When he reached a narrow patch, Diane supported him using the padded handle. Miles did not offer instructions. The restraint required more effort than speaking would have. When it was his turn, Miles clipped into the first anchor. Jamal watched the line rather than him. "Proceed." Miles crossed. The team's rhythm changed after that. Jamal called each movement. Diane reported Orion's condition without waiting to be asked. Ruth delivered only essential updates. Edna gave distances and structural details from the maintenance photographs. Miles identified which rock seams were original and which had widened since construction. No one role became less important because it had boundaries. Halfway along the traverse, Orion stopped. He did not pull toward the slope or bark. His head lifted, and both ears angled toward the rock above them. Diane froze. Orion hears something. Jamal raised a closed fist. Everyone stopped. At first, Miles heard only the low movement of a wind through the trees. Then came a faint brittle sound from above, like thin glass being pressed under a thumb. Jamal crouched, keeping tension on the line, and studied the shaded ledge above the road. A row of clear ice had begun separating from the rock. "We move back to the last tree pocket," he said. "Same order, controlled pace." No one ran. Jamal guided Diane and Orion into the protected section. Miles followed, remaining clipped until all four stood beneath dense branches. Less than a minute later, several pieces of ice released from the ledge. They struck the empty walkway and broke across the route in bright fragments. Orion had heard the cracking first, but the dog had not selected the shelter, assessed the ledge, or ordered the retreat. Jamal had turned one piece of information into a safe decision, and the team had followed it without argument. Miles looked at the broken ice scattered over the place where he had wanted everyone to move faster. Jamal met his eyes but said nothing. He did not need to. They waited until the ledge settled, then crossed the remaining distance through a higher line protected by trees. The auxiliary pump station appeared below them near late afternoon. It was a compact concrete building built into the slope, with a steel door and two insulated pipes disappearing into the snow. The last sunlight had taken on a pale amber color, stretching long shadows across the roof. Jamal inspected the entrance before allowing anyone inside. The air within was colder than outside and carried the mineral smell of standing water. Frost covered the lower pipes. The bypass valve was enclosed in a shell of cloudy ice, while the filter housing beneath the main pump showed a dark line of trapped sediment. Diane settled Orion on an insulated pad near the door and checked his shoulder. Jamal opened the equipment cases. Ruth connected Edna directly to the team channel. Miles stood near the center of the small building. No one waited for him to assign tasks. Jamal examined the filter housing. Diane prepared warming packs and checked everyone for signs of cold stress. Edna began walking them through the valve sequence. Ruth confirmed the latest pressure reading from Nora at Sunrise Ridge. Each person moved with purpose. For most of his life, Miles had believed being needed meant standing at the center of every decision. He had confused responsibility with control so completely that stepping back had felt like disappearing. Now he watched the team work without his permission and understood something he should have learned years earlier. A system did not become weaker when every part performed its own function. It became reliable. Miles removed his gloves, took out the old brass caliper, and measured the exposed section of the filter housing. "The outer ring has contracted," he said. "We will need to warm it evenly before Jamal loosens the seal." Edna answered through the radio. "Exactly." Jamal looked over. "Good. Mark the widest point for me." Miles did. Outside, the sun lowered behind the firs. Inside the frozen pump station, the problem remained difficult. The available time remained short, and no outcome was guaranteed. But it could be repaired. For the first time in years, Miles did not need to be the man carrying every part of the solution. He only needed to do his part well. Chapter 5. Two sides of the same pipe cold had settled inside the auxiliary pump station, as if the building had been constructed to preserve it. Frost coated the lower pipes in cloudy bands. The concrete floor held a thin shine where condensation had frozen, and every metal surface seemed to pull warmth from a gloved hand. The main circulation pump occupied the center of the room, connected to two insulated lines that disappeared through opposite walls, one carrying heated water toward Sunrise Ridge, the other returning it to the boiler. Jamal opened the equipment case and assigned the work without raising his voice. "I'll expose the filter housing." Miles checks the bypass assembly. Diane manages warming equipment and watches us for cold stress. Nobody removes a seal until Edna confirms the sequence. Miles accepted the instruction without adding to it. Diane placed sealed warming packs inside folded thermal blankets, then arranged them around the frozen valve housing. She kept moisture away from electrical connections and checked the surface temperature regularly with an infrared thermometer. A portable power unit supplied low heat through flexible heating pads wrapped around the outer pipe. "No direct flame," Edna reminded them through the radio. Her voice came from Sunrise Ridge with the same composed precision she had used on the mountain. "The valve body is cast iron. Heat one side too quickly, and you may damage the housing or the internal seal." "We're warming evenly," Diane replied. "Slow rise." "Good. Machinery appreciates patience more than people do." Jamal removed the outer cover from the filter assembly. Dark sediment was visible through the inspection window, packed around the lower edge. "That filter has not been cleaned recently," he said. Edna gave a quiet sound of disapproval. "The maintenance contractor claimed it was serviced in October." "October of which year?" Ruth asked over the command channel. No one answered. Miles crouched beside the bypass valve and brushed frost from the identification plate. The stamped numbers matched Edna's manual. He took the brass caliper from his shirt pocket and measured the exposed retaining ring at several points. "Contraction is uneven," he said. "The side closest to the wall is colder." "Then rotate the warming packs," Edna instructed. "Do not try the handle yet." Miles moved the packs and marked the widest point of the ring with Jamal's green pencil. The work required restraint rather than force. That made every second feel louder. At Sunrise Ridge, the residents were not waiting in silence. Nora Kemp had divided the common room into practical zones. The chairs nearest the portable heaters were reserved for residents with breathing or circulation concerns. A medication table had been established near the generator-backed outlets, and 2 volunteers recorded battery levels, room temperature, and the condition of each resident every 15 minutes. Coffee remained available, though its quality continued to be disputed. Nora moved between groups with a clipboard tucked against her green soft-shell jacket. Her chestnut hair had been twisted into a loose knot, and her red reading glasses sat on top of her head. A large ring of color-coded keys hung at her waist without making much noise. She had wrapped each key separately years ago so nighttime rounds would not wake the residents. The man who had experienced shortness of breath was sitting upright near a portable heater. His oxygen level had improved after Diane's instructions and the medical coordinator's guidance. He was still uncomfortable, but he was talking again. His first complaint was that everyone kept asking him how he felt. Nora considered that progress. Near the service corridor, Edna sat at a folding table covered with diagrams, pressure readings, and handwritten notes. Beside her stood Arthur Bellamy, an 81-year-old retired union electrician with long arms, a slight stoop, and a white mustache that made every serious expression look faintly skeptical. Arthur wore a navy cardigan over a tan work shirt, with brown suspenders crossing his narrow shoulders. An old union pin remained attached to the left strap. He had brought his own voltage meter from his apartment in a worn leather case. He studied the electrical panel feeding the circulation controls. "The indicator says the pump circuit is ready," Nora told him. Arthur tapped the metal cabinet twice with one thick knuckle. "The panel is lying." Nora looked at Edna. "Can panels do that?" "Anything can lie if humans designed the label." Arthur opened the outer door, but did not touch the internal components. One breaker sat in the correct position, yet the plastic around its edge showed faint discoloration. "When grid power failed, the transfer load hit this branch hard," he said. "Breaker may be damaged internally, even though it did not trip." Nora reached toward the panel. Arthur lifted one finger. "First, we make the electricity go somewhere else." Nora held basic facilities certification and had performed routine resets before. But Arthur still walked her through every step. She notified Lena and the medical coordinator before changing the power configuration. Essential medical equipment remained on a separate generator circuit. Nora moved the building's transfer switch to isolate the heating control panel. Arthur waited. "Now test it," he said. Nora used the meter at the approved points. "No voltage." "Test it again." She did. Still clear. Only then did Arthur allow the panel cover to be removed. A matching replacement breaker was stored in the maintenance cabinet, still sealed in its original box. Under Arthur's direction, Nora removed the damaged unit and installed the spare. Arthur did not take the tool from her or reach over her shoulder. He watched, corrected one hand position, and made her explain each step before continuing. When the replacement was secured, he nodded. "Now it is no longer lying." At the pump station, Ruth relayed the update. "Sunrise Ridge has replaced the control breaker. Panel remains isolated until Edna authorizes restart." Jamal looked toward Miles. "Filter housing is ready when you are." The frost around the bypass valve had softened into droplets. Miles measured the retaining ring again. "Expansion is nearly even." Edna asked him to read the numbers twice. After hearing them, she approved the next step. Jamal loosened the filter housing slowly, while Miles held the outer support steady. The seal resisted, then released with a low metallic vibration that traveled through the pipe. The sound passed directly through Miles. It was not the same sound as the mountain sensor mast 4 years earlier. He knew that. One came from trapped pressure in a heating line. The other had come from a steel support shifting under changing snow. His body did not care about the distinction. His fingers locked around the support bracket. The edges of the room seemed to pull inward. Jamal's voice became distant. The pump, the walls, and the radio dissolved beneath a memory of static and someone repeating surface temperatures too quickly. Miles tried to take a full breath and found only the upper half of one. "Miles," Jamal said. "I'm fine." The words came automatically and convinced no one. Diane set down the warming pack in her hand. She did not approach too quickly or touch him. Orion rose from the insulated pad near the entrance. The German shepherd crossed the station without urgency. His claws made soft sounds against the concrete. He stopped beside Miles and pressed the length of his rib cage against Miles's lower leg. Not hard. Just enough to become something solid in the room. Diane spoke evenly. "Put your hand on him." Miles kept his grip on the metal bracket. "Miles, the pipe can wait 10 seconds. Jamal supported the housing and said nothing. Miles released the bracket and placed one gloved hand on Orion's back. Beneath the thick yellow and black coat, the dog's body rose and fell. "Follow his breathing," Diane said. "Do not force a deep breath. Take the next one he takes." Orion inhaled. Miles followed. The first breath remained shallow. The second reached farther. By the fourth, the pump station had regained its full size. The radio continued murmuring. Frost still covered the walls. Nothing outside him had changed, but his hand no longer felt locked. "I heard the support mast," he said. Diane understood which mast he meant. It made that same vibration before the readings changed. "This is a filter housing," Jamal said quietly. "Not a sensor mast." "I know." Knowing had not been enough. Miles kept his hand on Orion's back for one more breath, then looked at Diane. "I thought the worst thing would be making another wrong decision." She waited. "It isn't." He swallowed. "The worst thing is that people might trust me again, and then discover I was never as certain as they believed." The admission left him feeling strangely exposed. Not weak, simply without the structure he usually placed around his fear. Diane leaned against the edge of the workbench. "Warren never thought you were certain all the time." Miles looked at her. "He trusted you because you said when you did not know," she continued. "At least you used to. I approved the system. And when Warren believed the system was wrong, he called you. Not because he expected perfection, because he expected you to stay in the problem with him." Miles looked down at Orion. The dog's amber eyes were half closed, his body still resting against Miles's leg. "I didn't stay afterward." "No." Diane did not soften the answer. Then she picked up the warming pack again. "But you are here now, so be here." There was work still waiting. Miles removed his hand from Orion's back. The dog remained beside him for another moment, then returned to Diane's station near the door. Jamal nodded toward the filter housing. "Ready?" Miles checked his breathing before answering. "Ready?" They removed the clogged filter element and placed it in a collection tray. Sediment had packed between the screen layers, restricting the return flow. Jamal cleaned the housing while Miles inspected the seal for cracking. The rubber remained flexible enough to reuse. At Sunrise Ridge, Edna coordinated the next sequence. "Nora, confirm the new breaker is installed, but the panel remains isolated." "Confirmed." "Arthur, confirm no voltage at the pump control terminals." Arthur's voice came over the radio. "Confirmed twice because once is how people become interesting stories." "Good. Keep it isolated." The filter went back into place. Jamal tightened the housing in stages while Miles measured the ring to ensure it seated evenly. Diane monitored the warming pads around the bypass valve until Edna approved a careful test. Miles placed one hand on the valve handle. Attempting movement. He applied steady pressure. The handle resisted, shifted less than an inch, then stopped. "Do not force it," Edna said. "I'm not." They added another warming pack and waited 3 minutes. On the second attempt, the handle moved through half its range. A muted rush traveled through the pipe. At Sunrise Ridge, Edna watched the pressure gauge near the boiler manifold. "Return pressure rising," she reported. "Nora, restore power to the control panel, but do not start the circulation pump." Nora returned the transfer switch to the approved position. Arthur verified voltage at the panel and stepped back. "Control power available," Nora said. Edna directed Jamal to open the internal service valve another quarter turn. Miles watched the pressure gauge in the pump station. For several seconds, the needles rose together. Then the return needle slowed. Edna's voice sharpened. "Hold position." Everyone stopped. The supply pressure continued increasing while return flow remained too low. If they started the pump in that condition, the system could shut itself down again. Miles traced the line diagram with one finger. Filter is clear. Bypass is moving. Edna reached the same conclusion from the other end. The relief line is not balancing. Jamal looked toward a small inspection window in the far wall. Beyond it, a narrow steel catwalk extended along the outside of the building and disappeared around the corner. The manual pressure relief valve sat at the far end. Edna explained that it should have remained partly open when the system lost power. If ice or a failed return spring had left it nearly closed, pressure could not equalize through the loop. "Can it be reached from inside?" Diane asked. "No," Edna said. "The access rod was removed during the last upgrade. Someone has to use the catwalk." Jamal opened the exterior inspection hatch just enough to see outside. The catwalk was coated in clear ice. Its graded surface extended above a steep section of the slope, protected only by a waist-high rail and an overhead maintenance frame. Lena's voice entered the channel. "Current light window is 28 minutes. After that, surface refreeze increases the risk of travel and extraction." "What are our options?" Jamal asked. "Withdraw now and begin evacuation staging, or perform one controlled, fully secured approach to the relief valve. No unprotected movement." Miles looked through the window at the catwalk. "I'll go." The words came quickly, but not from the same place as before. He was not trying to reclaim command. He knew the valve assembly, understood the pressure sequence, and could recognize whether the mechanism was resisting because of ice or internal damage. Jamal closed the inspection hatch. "You do not step outside until I inspect the anchor, rig the primary line, establish a secondary connection, and define the retrieval plan." Miles looked at the fading light beyond the glass. Earlier that day, he would have argued that each check consumed time. He might have reached for the door before Jamal finished speaking. Now he removed his gloves, flexed warmth back into his fingers, and waited beside Orion. "Tell me what you need me to do," he said. Chapter 6. Everyone holds part of the line. Jamal inspected the exterior anchor before allowing Miles near the door. The steel eye had been set into the concrete wall when the pump station was upgraded. Ice covered its lower edge, but the surrounding concrete showed no cracks or separation. Jamal cleared the metal, attached a test sling, and loaded it gradually. "Anchor holds," he said. "Primary line through the belay. Secondary connection stays on you at all times." He clipped the main rope to Miles's harness and ran it through the belay device secured at the interior anchor. A shorter adjustable lanyard hung from Miles's right side, ready to connect to the overhead maintenance frame if the catwalk became unsafe. Diane stood several feet behind Jamal, inside the protected section of the station. Her own harness was clipped to a separate wall point. The medical bag lay open beside her with warming blankets, hand packs, and supplies for cold exposure arranged where she could reach them quickly. No one was using a human body as an anchor. No one was relying on strength alone. Lena's voice came over the radio. "Confirm retrieval plan," Jamal answered. "If Miles cannot return under his own movement, I lock the main line, use the mechanical advantage kit, and bring him back to the doorway. Diane handles medical assessment after recovery. We do not send a second person onto the catwalk. Time limit? 18 minutes outside." Approved. Miles flexed his fingers inside his gloves. He had worked on exposed structures before, though not recently. His body remembered the preparation. Checking buckles, testing the radio, confirming the line was free of knots. In the past, the routine had made him impatient. Now it made the task feel shared. Diane shortened Orion's leash and guided him toward the insulated pad near the inner wall. "Stay." Orion remained standing. His amber eyes followed Miles to the steel door. The old dog's weight shifted forward, and for a moment Miles expected him to resist Diane or attempt to follow. Diane repeated the command once, quietly. Orion looked at her, then at Miles. After several seconds, he lowered himself onto the pad. His body remained tense, ears forward, but he stayed where Diane had placed him. Miles understood what the stillness cost him. Orion had once waited at a station for a man who never returned. Watching another person step through a mountain door asked something difficult of him. Yet the dog did not try to control the outcome by following. He trusted Diane to keep him there and Miles to come back. Jamal opened the exterior door. Cold air moved through the station, carrying the clean mineral smell of ice. The catwalk extended along the outer wall before turning around the corner toward the relief valve. Its grated steel surface had disappeared beneath a transparent layer of frozen runoff. Miles clipped his secondary lanyard to the first section of overhead frame. "Primary loaded," Jamal said. "Secondary confirmed." "Confirmed. Move when ready." Miles stepped outside. The catwalk vibrated faintly beneath his boots. He kept both hands near the rail and placed each foot flat rather than trusting the narrow edges of his soles. The main rope followed from behind, never slack enough to tangle and never tight enough to pull him off balance. "First frame section," he reported. "Copy," Jamal answered. "Line clean." Miles unclipped the secondary lanyard from the first point, only after attaching it to the next. The process was slow. He did not apologize for that. Below the catwalk, the slope dropped into a drainage channel filled with wind-shaped snow. The distance was not enormous, but enough to make a mistake serious. Late sunlight reflected from the frozen metal until the entire structure seemed made of glass. At the first corner, Miles stopped. The rail ahead had been bent inward by falling ice or accumulated snow. More concerning was the section of graded floor beneath it. One support bracket had pulled partly away from the wall, leaving the walkway slightly twisted. "Catwalk damage at the corner," he said. "One lower support is compromised." Jamal asked him to describe the frame above it. "Overhead crossbar appears intact. Exterior welds visible, no separation from the wall. Do not load the damaged floor until I see it." Miles angled the small camera mounted on his jacket toward the bracket. The image transmitted to Jamal's tablet. For several seconds, Miles stood alone in the light, while the others studied what he could see with his own eyes. The weight tested him more than the height did. His old instinct said he already had enough information. He could shift his weight, use the rail, and cross before the light weakened further. Instead, he remained still. Jamal's voice returned. "Crossbar is the better line. Transfer weight to the secondary lanyard and stay against the wall, one step at a time across the inner edge." Miles attached the lanyard to the crossbar and shortened it until his harness carried part of his weight. "Secondary loaded. Main line ready." Miles tested the twisted section with one boot. The grating moved slightly. Before he shifted forward, Orion barked from inside the station. One sharp sound. Miles stopped. A second bark followed, louder. Jamal looked past the open doorway toward the exterior frame above Miles. "Hold position." Miles froze with both lines loaded. At first, he saw nothing. Then a thin crack appeared through a strip of ice clinging to the upper beam. The sound reached him a moment later. A brittle separation, faint but unmistakable. "Stay against the wall," Jamal ordered. A section of ice broke free. It struck the catwalk several feet ahead of Miles, scattering across the grating and shaking the metal beneath his boots. Small fragments slid through the gaps and disappeared down the slope. The main piece had landed where Miles would have been if he had continued without waiting. No one spoke for several seconds. Orion gave a low sound from inside the station, but did not leave the pad. Jamal inspected the overhead beam through the camera. Remaining ice looks stable. Clear the loose pieces with your pole. Do not kick them. Miles used the short equipment pole attached to his pack to push the fragments away from his route. Path clear. Proceed under secondary support. He crossed the damaged section slowly, transferring most of his weight through the lanyard and keeping his boots along the inner edge. Once he reached stable grating, he secured himself to the next frame and reported his position. Only then did he allow himself to look back. Through the open doorway, Orion was visible between Jamal and Diane. The German shepherd remained lying down, though his head was raised and every part of him pointed toward Miles. Orion had heard the ice before the humans recognized it. Jamal had translated that warning into an order. The lines had kept Miles secure. Trust had not been a feeling. It had been a series of people doing what they had agreed to do. The relief valve stood at the far end of the catwalk inside a shallow metal enclosure. Its red handwheel was rimmed with frost, and a small locking screw prevented accidental movement. Miles brushed away the ice and tested the wheel without forcing it. Handwheel seized, Edna answered from Sunrise Ridge. Check the lock screw beneath the center hub. It may still be under tension. Miles found it beneath a layer of frozen condensation. Visible. Heavily iced. Warm the screw housing first. Use the small chemical pack, not the large one. Miles removed a hand warmer from his outer pocket and held it against the housing through a folded cloth. Jamal watched the time. At Sunrise Ridge, Edna instructed Nora and Arthur to prepare the internal controls, but leave the circulation pump off. The whole system waited on a piece of metal smaller than Miles's thumb. After 2 minutes, he tested the screw with a compact wrench. It moved less than a quarter turn. Lock loosening. Stop there, Edna said. Jamal, reduce pressure on the internal service valve by 10 degrees. Inside the station, Jamal secured Miles's rope in the locked position before reaching the valve. Diane took visual watch over the belay while he adjusted the internal handle by the amount Edna requested. Internal pressure reduced, Jamal reported. Miles returned both hands to the relief wheel. Attempting movement. The wheel resisted. His shoulders tightened. He could have forced it. He had enough leverage and the light was fading. Instead, he stopped. Resistance is not changing, he said. Edna asked, Can you see the spindle? Partially. Any bending? No visible bend. Then the remaining load is hydraulic. Jamal, another 5 degrees on the internal valve. The adjustment was made. Miles tried again. The handwheel shifted. A low vibration traveled through the pipe, followed by a brief release of trapped air. Miles turned the wheel gradually, pausing after each quarter rotation so Edna could watch the pressure gauges at Sunrise Ridge. Supply pressure lowering, she said. Return line responding. At the residential complex, Nora stood near the boiler controls with one hand on the authorized start switch. Arthur watched the replacement breaker and voltage meter. Around them, residents had fallen quiet. Some sat wrapped in blankets near the portable heaters. Others stood in the doorway, listening to the building as if it were an old friend trying to speak through a wall. Edna read the gauges. Relief flow stable. Nora, enable circulation control. Nora activated the panel. Arthur watched the meter. Voltage steady. Start the pump at minimum setting, Edna said. Nora pressed the control. For several seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then the pipe behind the common room wall gave one dull knock. A second followed farther down the corridor. The sounds moved through Sunrise Ridge in sequence. Not loud, not dramatic, but regular. Water was returning to sections of pipe that had been cold and still. A woman near the window placed her hand over the radiator. Not warm yet, she said. Edna watched the temperature gauge. It will take time. At the pump station, the return pressure needle began to rise. Miles held the relief wheel steady. Pressure balancing, Edna reported. Keep that position. The pipes beneath the catwalk changed from a strained vibration to a smoother mechanical hum. Nora's voice came through the radio several minutes later. Common room temperature has stopped falling. A cheer began somewhere behind her, but Edna interrupted it. Do not celebrate until we confirm flow in both residential wings. The cheer turned into laughter. One by one, Nora reported warmer return lines from the building zones. The system was not fully restored, but it was functioning. Emergency evacuation was no longer the only option. Lena gave the order Miles had been waiting for. Exterior task complete. Return to station. Miles secured the handwheel, checked that the lock remained in the approved position, and began moving back. The damaged section seemed narrower on the return trip. He followed the same sequence, reporting every transfer. Stable frame. Mainline clean, Jamal answered. Secondary transferred. Copy. When Miles reached the final section, Orion stood. Diane kept one hand on his harness. Stay. The dog remained beside her, trembling slightly but obedient. Miles stepped through the door. Jamal closed it behind him and locked the exterior latch. Only after Miles had disconnected from the primary line did Orion cross the room. The German shepherd stopped in front of him and pressed his shoulder firmly against Miles's thigh. Miles rested one hand on the dog's neck. I came back, he said. A sharp crack sounded outside. Orion's head snapped toward the roof. He barked. Jamal looked up and saw a small sheet of ice sliding from the edge above the entrance. Back. He caught Diane by the upper arm and pulled her toward the inner wall. Her boot slipped on the frozen floor near the doorway, but the safety tether attached to her harness stopped her before she reached the edge of the entrance platform. The ice struck outside and broke harmlessly across the closed catwalk. Diane regained her footing. Jamal checked her harness and ankle. I'm fine, she said. Diane looked toward Orion. Good warning. Orion sneezed once and leaned against Miles again, apparently satisfied that the humans had finally learned to listen. By the time the team descended, the road crew had cleared a controlled lane beneath the slide zone. Medical vehicles reached Sunrise Ridge to evaluate the residents, check the oxygen user, and confirm that no one required immediate transport. At the lower staging area, Lena met the returning team beneath portable floodlights. The warmth from the valley had vanished, and night had sharpened the air. She listened to Jamal's report before addressing Miles. You stopped when instructed, reported changes, and followed the retrieval plan. Miles waited. That was good work. She did not call him brave. She did not praise him for saving 31 people, because he had not done that alone. Her words meant more because they were accurate. Diane stood nearby with Orion at her side. The dog was tired now, his right shoulder visibly stiff, but he remained alert. Miles approached her after the equipment had been checked in. What I said at the station was not enough, he began. Diane waited. I left because I believed my guilt would enter every room I walked into. I told myself staying away would make your life easier. It did not. I know that now. You should have known then. Yes. Miles looked at Orion, then back at her. You lost Warren, and I made you lose a friend at the same time. I cannot make those 4 years different. No. I am sorry. Diane's face softened, but only slightly. Trust does not come back because one day went well. Miles nodded. He could have promised to repair the friendship, answer every call, attend every gathering, and become the man he had once been. Those promises would have been another attempt to control the future. I'll answer the phone tomorrow, he said. Diane studied him for a long moment. Then start with tomorrow. Orion stepped between them and sat in the snow, tired enough that his back leaned lightly against both of their legs. No one mistook the contact for forgiveness, but neither of them moved away. Chapter 7. The room with the light on the months after Sunrise Ridge did not transform Miles Corbett into a different man. Transformation was a word people used when they wanted healing to sound clean. Miles still woke some night when wind moved across the metal sign above his shop. The vibration traveled through the brick wall with just enough resemblance to the old sensor mast to pull him from sleep. On those nights, he sat on the edge of his bed until he could name the room, the hour, and every ordinary sound around him. There were afternoons when conversation became too heavy and he closed the clock shop before sunset. He still ignored some invitations. He still needed quiet more than most people understood. The difference was that he no longer disappeared without explanation. When Diane called the morning after the mountain mission, Miles answered on the 4th ring. Neither of them mentioned his promise. She asked whether his hands had stopped shaking from the cold. He asked about Orion's shoulder. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes, but when it ended, Miles placed the telephone on the counter instead of returning it to the drawer. The next Tuesday, Jamal arrived at the shop carrying a portable generator with a damaged fuel line. I was told you repair things that refuse to cooperate, he said. I repair clocks. Jamal set the generator beside the workbench. This has timing. It also has gasoline. Then try not to polish it. Miles should have sent him to a proper repair shop. Instead, he cleared one end of the long work table. The generator took most of the morning. Jamal understood the larger components, while Miles noticed a warped gasket near the carburetor housing. They disagreed twice, stopped before either disagreement became a contest, and eventually got the engine running evenly in the alley behind the shop. The following Tuesday, Ruth appeared with 2 old emergency radios and her scratched red thermos. One transmits but does not receive, she said. The other receives every taxi dispatcher between here and Wenatchee. This is still a clock shop. Then put up a sign. By noon, the repair table held a generator, 3 radios, a lantern with a broken switch, and only one actual clock. Miles began opening the shop early on Tuesdays. He did not announce a program or ask the town for funding. He placed a second coffee pot near the back wall, moved the most delicate clocks into a glass cabinet, and added 4 folding chairs around the work table. At first, only Jamal and Ruth came regularly. Diane visited when Orion had enough energy for the walk from the parking area. The German Shepherd would inspect the room, circle the olive canvas pad Miles had placed beneath the table, then lie down where he could watch the door. He still lived with Diane. No one discussed changing that. Orion's bond with Miles developed without replacing the life he had shared with Warren. Sometimes the dog rested beside Miles's workbench. Other days, he ignored everyone and slept with his head on Diane's boot. His choices were accepted without interpretation. By early spring, Sunrise Ridge joined the Tuesday gathering through a video screen Ruth installed on a wall bracket. Edna Cho appeared first, seated in front of a carefully arranged shelf of manuals. Her silver bob was perfectly combed, and her green notebook rested open beside the keyboard. "You have mounted the camera too high," she told Ruth. "You have not even said hello." "I can say hello after I stop looking up everyone's nose." Arthur Bellamy sat beside Edna in his navy cardigan, his old Union pin still fixed to one suspender. He brought diagrams showing common electrical mistakes in older homes. His first lesson was not about repairing anything. It was about recognizing when not to begin. "If you cannot verify that the power is off," Arthur said, tapping his voltage meter twice, "your tool is the telephone. Call someone licensed." Several people groaned. Arthur looked pleased. "Disappointment is cheaper than an ambulance." Nora Kemp created a list of residents who lived alone beyond the town center. She did not call it a vulnerable person registry, because many of the people on it disliked being described that way. Instead, she named it the Winter Contact List. Each person chose who should check on them during an outage, which medical or heating equipment they used, and whether emergency workers had permission to enter if they did not answer. The list was voluntary. That mattered to Nora. "Preparedness should not feel like someone taking your front door key," she said. Word spread. A retired teacher brought 2 flashlights whose battery compartments had corroded. A former logger arrived with a camp stove and stayed to teach everyone how to inspect fuel seals. A woman who had repaired sewing machines for 40 years showed Miles how to identify wear by sound before a component visibly failed. The room became crowded enough that the town fire marshal appeared one Tuesday and informed Miles that he needed a clearer exit path. Ruth accused the town of suppressing innovation. The fire marshal pointed at a tower of extension cords. "Your innovation is blocking the door." They reorganized the room. By summer, the town offered a small grant for equipment storage and safety supplies. A handwritten sign was replaced by a simple painted one: "Winter Workshop, Tuesdays, 8 a.m." The name remained even when there was no snow. Miles resisted being called the founder. He did not give speeches about his recovery or present himself as proof that loneliness could be solved with enough community service. Some mornings he contributed little beyond unlocking the door and making coffee. That was enough. The room did not require him to rescue anyone. It only required him to keep opening it. Orion found a new role there as well. His shoulder no longer tolerated extended mountain work, but Diane used his calm temperament during short safety demonstrations. She taught visitors how to approach a tense dog from the side, how to avoid reaching suddenly over the head, and how to read a stiffened body before a growl became necessary. Orion participated when he wanted to. When he became tired, he walked back to his pad and ended the lesson himself. One rainy afternoon, Diane arrived after everyone else had left. She carried a small canvas case in both hands. Miles recognized it before she placed it on the workbench. Warren's Field Watch. The case had spent 4 years in a drawer at Diane's house. Miles remembered the watch strapped over Warren's glove during winter inspections, its broad face designed to be read through blowing snow. The crystal bore a deep diagonal scratch from the time Warren slipped while repairing a roadside sensor and insisted the rock had attacked him. "It stopped last month," Diane said. Miles did not reach for it immediately. "You want me to repair it?" "I would not have brought it to a bakery." He opened the case. The leather strap was dry but usable. The hands had stopped at 317. When Miles lifted the back, he found old lubricant thickened around the movement and a worn mainspring that no longer held tension. Neither problem was unusual. That was strangely comforting. "I can replace the crystal," he said. The scratch is deep. Diane ran one finger over the damaged surface. Will the scratch stop it from working? No. Then leave it. Miles looked at her. She did not seem fragile while holding Warren's watch. She seemed certain. Not every mark is damage, she said. The sentence echoed something Miles had once believed only about objects. He worked on the watch across several Tuesdays, never rushing it and never taking it home. Diane remained in the shop while he repaired the movement. Sometimes they spoke about Warren. Sometimes they discussed Orion's diet, the rising cost of heating oil, or whether Ruth was intentionally interfering with the radio antenna so she could complain about it. Warren's name gradually became part of ordinary conversation. That was the change Miles noticed most. Grief did not leave the room when they spoke of him. It simply stopped demanding that someone else leave instead. When the watch was ready, Miles wound it and placed it on the work table. The second hand moved. Diane listened to the ticking for a long time before fastening the watch around her wrist. It looked too large there, but she did not mind. "Running 2 minutes slow?" she asked. 1. You are becoming careless. Age. Diane smiled. It was not forgiveness completed. Their friendship still contained blank years and conversations they had not yet attempted. But neither of them walked away. Near the end of the following winter, Ruth brought someone new to the workshop. Calvin Mercer stood just outside the open door while Ruth entered without him. He was 69, tall but bent slightly through the upper back, with a weathered face. Iron gray hair cut close, and hands darkened by old grease that seemed permanently embedded around the nails. A railroad patch remained stitched to the chest of his brown work coat. He repaired locomotive engines for 36 years, Ruth announced. Calvin stayed on the sidewalk. "I said I would look," he replied. "I did not say I would join anything. No one asked you to sing." "I am not staying." Miles recognized the stance. One foot angled away, shoulders held as if entering the room might create an obligation he could not later escape. Calvin's wife had died nearly 2 years earlier. Since then, according to Ruth, he had declined dinners, church breakfasts, volunteer projects, and every invitation phrased as something that might be good for him. Miles knew how insulting kindness could feel when it arrived carrying instructions. He did not tell Calvin the workshop would help. Instead, he pointed toward a portable generator on the center table. "That engine runs for 40 seconds and shuts down." Calvin remained by the door. "Fuel filter?" "New." "Vent cap?" "Clear." "Governor spring?" "Within specification." Calvin narrowed his eyes at the generator. Miles stepped aside. "We are out of ideas." That was not entirely true. Jamal suspected the carburetor gasket, and Miles had already noticed that the replacement looked slightly misaligned. Calvin came one step inside. "Start it." Jamal pulled the cord. The generator caught, ran unevenly, and stopped. Calvin listened to the final sputter. "You installed the gasket backward." Jamal folded his arms. "It only fits one way." "It fits 2 ways. One is wrong." Calvin crossed to the table, removed his coat, and pointed toward a narrow air channel partly blocked beneath the housing. No one praised him excessively. No one asked how it felt to be useful again. Miles simply brought another chair from the wall and placed it near the workbench. Calvin sat. They reversed the gasket. The generator started and continued running. Only then did Orion rise from beneath the table. The old German shepherd walked slowly toward Calvin. His muzzle had become more silver over the year, and the first steps after resting showed greater stiffness in his right shoulder. Calvin watched him approach, but did not reach down. Orion stopped beside the chair and lowered his head onto Calvin's snow-damp boot. The room became quiet for a moment. Calvin looked toward Diane. "What does that mean?" "It means your boot is available." Ruth laughed into her coffee. Calvin rested one careful hand between Orion's ears. No one called the moment destiny. Orion had not found a man in need and delivered him into a new life. Ruth had issued the invitation. Miles had opened the door. Calvin had chosen to cross the threshold because someone presented a problem he understood. The dog merely recognized that the room was calm. Outside, light snow moved along Front Street. Inside, radio batteries charged along one wall. Arthur explained a circuit diagram through the video screen. Nora updated the contact list. Jamal argued with Calvin about gasket design, already sounding as though they had known each other for years. From Diane's wrist came the quiet ticking of Warren's watch. Miles stood near the door and looked at the people gathered around the long table. He had once believed usefulness meant being the first person onto the mountain and the last one to release the rope. He had thought strength required carrying every consequence alone. Now he understood that some lives were held together differently. Someone checked the voltage. Someone read the map. Someone noticed the sound of cracking ice. Someone made coffee, answered the radio, opened the door, or added one more chair. No single act saved the room. Everyone simply held a small part of the line. Miles switched on the lamp above the entrance as afternoon darkened the street. Its warm light fell across the snow outside, marking the doorway without demanding that anyone enter. But if someone did decide to step inside, there would be a place waiting at the table. Some wounds are not meant to be erased. Like the scratch on Warren's watch, they may remain while life slowly begins to move again. Miles found peace not by carrying every burden alone, but by answering the phone, trusting another person's hands, and keeping one chair open for someone who had not yet found the courage to enter. Sometimes God's grace appears in quiet ways. A faithful dog waiting by the door, a friend who does not give up, or a light left on for the person still standing outside. May you find the strength to take one honest step toward the people who care about you. Share in the comments what this story meant to you, and subscribe for more stories of courage, companionship, and hope. May God bring peace to your home and steady your heart through every season.